Welcome to Health System CIO's interview with Erick Decker, Vice President and Chief Information Security Officer with Intermountain Healthcare. I'm Anthony Guerra, Founder and Editor-in-Chief. Erick, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Anthony.
All right, Erick, a little bit about your organization and role, if you want to start off with that.
Sure. Intermountain Health is an integrated delivery network located in the Mountain West region. So we're primarily based in Utah, Nevada, Colorado, Idaho, and some other states minimally, around that area. An integrated delivery network means that we've got both the health plan and the provider side, the healthcare delivery services. So we cover about 1 million lives under our health plan and quite a bit of lives, on the delivery side of care.
All right, very good. And I know your main job is just one of the things you do. So if you want to briefly list the most important industry policy related roles that you've taken on.
Yeah, so I call it my second job, ironically, but no payment. There's no remuneration that happens there. But no, I serve as the chairman of the cyber working group of the Health Sector Council, and what that is a critical infrastructure policy advisory committee. It's what we call CPAC. There are 16 critical infrastructure that are outlined in the National Defense and Authorization Act. Originally came through some executive orders under the Obama era. And so those 16 critical infrastructure, some examples are finance, oil and gas, water, transportation, healthcare, agriculture, and so forth. And these are infrastructures and organizations that actually make up our nation's critical infrastructure, but are generally run by private industry. And so because of that, there's a national interest in making sure that those are protected from all hazards, cyber being one of those hazards. So the cyber working group we have about 425 organizations that are members of that, about 1,000 people inside representing those 425 organizations. And if you are a critical infrastructure owner and operator and you're in healthcare, you should absolutely be participating in this group. Yeah, we produced 27 publications over the last 6 years. 3 of them are joint release products with Health and Human Services. This is where HICP came from. And if you've heard of 405D, that's one of the task groups inside the cyber working group. HICP was the inaugural product of that, which is cyber hygiene. That's been embedded in law. Another example, it amended HITECH of HIPAA and HITECH and instructed OCR to consider the adoption of hygiene, of HICP essentially, during any enforcement action. That's an avenue of progress on how the industry and the government have come together to try to bolster up our resiliency, across the industry. So we do a lot of work with HHS. We do a lot of work with CISO, as well as the Office of the National Cybersecurity Director in the White House and the National Security Council in the White House.
All right, very good. So sort of the big kind of development on the policy front, in December, HHS released its introductory strategy for healthcare sector cybersecurity. They've got 4 points in there. Establish voluntary cybersecurity performance goals, provide resources to incentivize and implement the practices, implement an HHS-wide strategy to support greater enforcement and accountability, and expand and mature the one-stop shop within HHS. So there's things in there that they're going to work on, and what they're going to come out with are, and we love acronyms, right? Healthcare and public health sector specific cyber performance goals, HPH-CPGs. We talk about high need versus essential, and for the high need organizations will get help with the essential requirements, but perhaps not the enhanced requirements. Okay, all kind of makes sense. Now, trying to sort of give the industry some idea what's happening, it should jive with CISO's cross-sector CPGs and HICP, which you mentioned. So they're saying here's where we're going. We're going to be working on this stuff. We're going to take input, but don't be too scared because there's stuff out there this is going to jive with. So you're not going to get hit out of left field
Yeah,
with some crazy stuff.
that's right.
So that's my reading of it. You tell me if I'm on the right track.
That's exactly correct. And honestly, it's the relationship and the partnership of the cyber working group and the relationships and partnerships that we've had with our federal partners that has gotten us there. So the federal government has recognized the need to that hospitals in particular are getting beat, through ransomware attacks and other disruptive attacks, and more needs to happen. We have developed HICP. We developed HICP at the end of 2018 was when that was published. And HICP is hygiene. It contemplates 5 threats, 10 practices to mitigate those 5 threats. And it's a how-to guide for the small, medium, and large size organizations. And we actually broke it up in a playbook for each of those 3 designations because everybody's a little different. How you handle cyber for a small critical access hospital is very different for a large integrated delivery network like Intermountain. So think of HICP as the how. It's your guide to achieving. The CPGs, the cybersecurity performance goals, which originally came out from CISO for all 16 critical infrastructure. That was, I believe, last year when they released that. Those are more outcome-driven statements. So what we've done, working with HHS, and as HHS has been developing the CPGs, is we took some of the outcomes associated to the CPGs and said, this is what we want to achieve. HICP is the path to doing it. And so that's how those 2 things come together. You'll see very prominently that it shows in that way. So the good news is if you've done HICP, you've actually done the CPGs, generally speaking. There'll be some evaluations that you're going to need to do. It is very specific and very, targeted to some very essential things. But I think it's not going to be out of left field kind of, publication that comes up and now hopefully you're not going to think, oh, geez, now I got a whole bunch of other stuff to do. It really, I mean, if you haven't done these things, then this is really giving you a pathway for exactly what you need to be focused on minimally to prevent against some and respond to some of these disruptive attacks that are hitting us.
So it makes me think of it's not going to be like some of the interoperability stuff they came out with. They came out with some stuff a little while ago about you had to be able to respond to these requests from anywhere for patient information. And that everyone was like, whoa, 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 that's a lot of work. Like we got a lot of stuff to do. It was a little bit of panic but a lot of things had to happen. My guess, and you tell me if I'm wrong, is that if you have a CISO, if you even have someone with that title, and they've been working towards a framework, and you've got cyber insurance, which means you must have jumped some hurdles. When this stuff comes out, I'm guessing probably almost 100%, you're going to be like doing that, already good.
Depending on depending on your organization and what your level of capability is, you certainly will know exactly what those things are. You will probably have already, you brought up cyber insurance, you probably will have already discussed it with your underwriters. We looked at those, those essential, those mandatory things that the cyber insurance underwriters are looking for as well, and conceptualize that in the same kind of model and so forth. So now it's all, it hopefully is incredibly aligned. That I think that there's, I mean, the fact of the matter is we did a landscape analysis last year where we studied cybersecurity capability in hospitals. That was actually one of the major inputs into the CPGs. And there's a lot of things that I think people assume that are happening, and they're actually not in its totality. So like an example is, I'm trying to remember the exact stats, but it was something along the lines of either 84 or 94 or 92% of organizations have put multi-factor authentication on email, on the email portal. So that sounds like a good number, except for the fact that phishing and credential attack is the number one, social engineering. That's the number one attack that hits organizations. So if you don't have multi-factor authentication on your email system, then all you have is a password protecting your account. it's going to get hit, and people are going to use that account to impersonate you and use and do more attacks. It could be business email compromise attacks. It could be, trying to push to get to more privileged access. It could be deploying malware. I mean, it can be used for all different types of things. And that delta of from the either it was at 84, 92% to 100%, that actually represents a significant number of hospitals in our United States that haven't done that. And so that's a good example of some very, very basic things that just have to be in place in this day and age in order for you to protect against the kind of attack that's happening. And those are not sophisticated attacks. This is actually very easy to conduct that kind of attack.
So this is an interesting question. At least it occurred to me it was interesting on the timing of this, right? So we think that if you're fairly advanced, you've been working on cybersecurity, you're going to be okay. But that's not what this whole thing is targeted towards. This whole thing is targeted towards the people that are, or the organizations that are weak or non-existent on cybersecurity. We want to get everybody up to a certain minimum level. That's the goal. We use the term of a high need organization. So, we've heard a lot about rural organizations that, hey, we don't have the staff, we don't have the money, right? So we've got this conundrum, which is why we're talking about financial incentives. So I'm wondering about this from a timing point of view. If I am a high need organization, I don't have any money, I'm a rural or whatever, and I say, yeah, I'd love to do this stuff, but we don't have any resources. So, okay, you're going to require us to do this stuff, you're going to give us some money. There's a timing element to here. Now, for example, what I'm saying is somebody could say, well, I can't skate to the puck. I don't have the money to lay out. And if somehow I did have the money to lay out, would I get paid back? Could that be part of the dynamic, or is it better for me to wait till this stuff comes out? And I assume the deadlines for high need organizations will have to jive with the timing of availability to the resources. You see what I'm saying? So what's your advice for someone at a high need organization in terms of managing this so they don't get themselves into trouble and not laying out money that they might not get back?
So a couple of points. The first point is when the CPGs are released, to note that these are voluntary CPGs. So what comes out in that first bullet point of that concept paper is not a mandatory enforcement requirement. That's the third bullet point of what HHS is working on. The second thing I'll say is when we were conducting the landscape analysis, we interviewed about 20, 25 different hospital systems, including the high need organizations. And when we asked them the questions about like help us understand the resource constraints and the challenges that you face, to a T, every single one of them said, just tell us what to do. Because part of the problem, and this is part of the problem in cybersecurity is so big. And and there's a lot of noise, especially there's a lot of vendors in this space, a lot of people trying to get your attention, talking about this is the most important thing to do. If you don't have sophisticated cybersecurity professionals, it's hard to understand what thing is actually the most important thing, to hit first. And there has been, even with, HICP and things like that we produced, HICP is still pretty big. It's 10 practices. It gets in to some, some depth, but it doesn't prescribe, you do these things and then these things and then these things. The CPGs are going to be more clear and more tactical, if you want to think about it that way. It's very directional. And so I think you're going to get the higher need organizations will get the gift of focus on this. One of the considerations that was built into the CPGs was cost. Like, are these things going to come with high cost in order to get to the essentials? And, we did not want to include things that just were filled with high cost. So, impact to threat mitigation, like that was all part of the calculus that was used. So there are, not to say that there's not cost inside the CPGs, there are some things that are going to cost, but there's also plenty of things in the CPGs that actually it's just people time, to work on instead of, hard license cost or things along those lines. So I think that will help. All of that said, absolutely the high need organizations need help, and so we, from industry association side, not through multiple angles, through the industry associations, when I go up to the Hill and I talk to the both Senate and House side of the House. I bring this up. I bring up, different types of options that could be potentially contemplated. We've within the cyber working group, we have provided the federal government a policy recommendations paper that talks about some of the models that could be used for like a reimbursement strategy or a granting strategy or something along those lines. I think it's actually important for folks to know there are grants in place today that you could apply for, that you can get some cyber help with. FEMA actually has a grant active today that's connected to some networking dollars, and you can use that if you apply for it for some cyber assistance there. So that's an option. All of that said, there still is more. This is like what I just described is not enough, to bolster up an entire industry. So HHS is working with Congress right now, trying to figure out some new appropriations that could be applied into this space. I don't have any answers for you on is that successful, is that not successful? Our current, our Congress today, we continue to push the ball down the road on the budget, and so it's hard to get stuff in right now, but the need is understood, and we are having these discussions.
So when this came out in December, you posted some stuff about this to try and put a little color around it. There was a little bit of pushback from some entities. I guess anytime we talk about, and you said the first iteration will be voluntary, but I guess the anticipation is that at some point, some of these things will become mandatory. There's even, there's language right in the 4 points of enforcement and accountability. That scares some people. That scared some people. And you posted sort of your point of view, which is to me, and you can put your color on it, was, hey, this has to be done. Like this just has to be done. So I wonder if you want to just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So first of all, I mean, the thing that as a collective cyber working group, we understand the balance between voluntary practices and mandates, and we understand the challenges that are those who have and those who do not have. So we do believe that there needs to be incentives in place to assist those who don't have in order to get to mandates. But we also believe, and frankly, when we were talking and doing these interviews and the landscape analysis and so forth, every one of them, when we asked the question, would you support a mandate if a mandate was driven? They said, as long as there's funding for this, absolutely, because it offers clarity on exactly what needs to be done. And in a lot of cases, we're just too busy, in order to understand to spend the time to try to understand the threat landscape and get this, perfectly right. If you just tell us what to do, we'll just go do it. And there's, I mean, in healthcare, there's a long-standing history of that, of, you will put an environment of care in place, standards of practice in place, and these are the rules that you will follow. Like CEOs get that. And so I think that there actually is folks that are going to welcome that if there are funding, if there's an incentive to get them there. And I think that's really the crux of this. I personally do believe that we need to get more clear with this. We've been trying voluntary since HIPAA came out. The security rule came out in 2005. We're almost 20 years into it, and we haven't been able to stop the flood of ransomware attacks that have hit our industry. It only accelerates year over year. And we do have hygiene. We do have all these clarity. We do have some additional carrots that have been released. HICP, like I said, it's connected to the enforcement action now with OCR. If you've done it and you become a victim of one of these attacks, OCR is instructed to consider your adoption of HICP during enforcement action. That has helped, but has it helped to get the entire industry to move? I think there's more that's needed there. As long as we balance it right, and as long as the controls, the CPGs that we're applying are informed by the industry, are specific to the threats that we're facing, and there's dollars, to help those that are in need, I think that this is absolutely the right path.
So it's really interesting. The position that you're in, and I can tell you want to get this right, right? This is
Oh
really
yeah.
important, and you want to get it right. So, for example, meaningful use,
Hmm.
how that rolled out and went down. I was following that pretty closely at the time, and kind of looking back, there were kind of two big areas that they seemed to miss. One was kind of cybersecurity, and the other one was interoperability. They didn't really have a lot in there about that, and I think there would be some who would look back and go, yeah, we kind of missed, we didn't get it perfect, which
Hmm.
happens, right? It's messy. But I would imagine you're in a position of saying, I really want us to get this right. I don't want to be looking back 5 years from now and go, man, so just tell me, is that your mindset? And I
Yes.
assume
Of
tell me
course it
your
is.
thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, now perfection
Right.
is nigh impossible to, to get right. And look, people, when they come out, people are going to look at it. They're going to beat it up. I'm sure somebody's going to question why this and not that. Of course, all of that is going to happen. We live in this industry. What I'll tell you is this: it was informed by the landscape analysis. The landscape analysis took an adversarial mindset. How are we getting beat? We studied that. We looked at FBI data. We looked at CISA data, HC3 data, open source data from our cybersecurity vendors, and we compared that to the stated capabilities of our hospitals. So we looked at the two major studies were the Chimes Most Wired survey and the AHA Class Sensinet survey. And both of those studies, essentially looked at the journey that organizations were on to the NIST CSF, the cybersecurity framework, to HICP. The AHA Class Sensinet study looked specifically at HICP. And for those organizations that had the capability, so there's bias there, the capability to answer those questions, which is already, you have to
Mm-hmm.
be this kind of high,
Right.
on the ride to do that. We got an understanding of where they are, and then we did this. We did this compare, like, how are we going to beat? What do we say how do we say we're being our level of resilience is in place? And then we looked at it a different way. The cyber working group came together and said, here are the practices that we think are important from 4 tranches of priority. Of course, HHS, CISA, National Security Council, they took all of this input. And then they came back to us again and asked us questions. What does this look right? Does that look right? No, yes, no, yes. And we did this round and round and round kind of iteration until the final result, I think, is honestly, if you look at how the attacks are happening, there's 3 main ways that organizations are getting beat. The initial compromise, I should say. It's social engineering, of course, no surprise there. But let me give it a good example of that. Social engineering that includes social engineering your help desk.
Mm.
Calling up and saying, I need to add a second, I've lost my phone, I need to add another multi-factor device on my hand. And the help desk comes back and says, well, just give us the last 4 of your social and your date of birth. Oh, sure, I've got all of that, because all of that has been breached time and time and time again. That's all on the dark web. I mean, that is a very bad identification verification process anymore. And so it's very easy to bypass it. It's very easy. You don't even have to hack. You hack the people, essentially. So that's one way. The other way is you've got a vulnerability that's in your DMZ or on your network that's exposed directly to the internet that gets hit because it's of high criticality. It's got remote code execution. And CISA actually produces a list of what's called known exploitable vulnerabilities, or KEVs, more acronyms for you. And what they do is they look at, because there's a lot of vulnerabilities that are out there. Again, a lot of noise. And they have all kinds of intel that says which ones are being exploited right now by people. And so all you have to do is marry the CISA list to your list, and then do that. Do that like now, like not 7 days from now, like literally right now. You do that. And then the third one is third parties getting hit that have connectivity back to you. So third party, there's a lot in the third party space. They've got our data that can lead to privacy breaches. Yes. The Target breach 2013-14, that was an HVAC vendor who got compromised. They had connectivity back into Target, back channel connectivity, and then they rode that, and then they got into the network and then conducted their attack. That's a very common attack path, that network connectivity attack. Those are the 80% of the attacks that are out there start with one of those three. And then they all go to a privilege escalation attack. They go in and they get your most sensitive credentials inside your organization. Could be Active Directory, could be any number of different things. And then they use that because once they have those master keys, essentially, they can then deploy ransomware, or they can then steal data, or they can then steal intellectual property, or do whatever, or persist for a long period of time and wait for something. I mean, like, everything sort of stems from that.
Mm-hmm.
So an adversarial mindset means, look at how that happens. Look at how 80% of the attacks are occurring, and now apply what controls are the most important. So what are the things that you can get right up front to stop it from the beginning? And what are the things you can do right at the end, right before the bad happens? And you kind of sandwich it. That's the strategy. When you think about CPGs, you think about essentials and enhanced, and then just in general, risk analysis inside your organization and cyber of these days. Also, I mean, informally, when I went and spoke to, I speak to some CISOs who have unfortunately had these attacks that have happened. I said, I've asked them, it's a small N here, but it's 100%. And I've done my own little informal study. I said, I don't want you to tell me what happened, because I know it's already sensitive anyways. I said, but let me guess, one of these three ways was how they got in, and the privilege escalation was the last thing that they did before it all went bad. And to a T, all of them nodded their head. And so, like, the bad guys, this is their playbook. I mean, it doesn't matter. It's their playbook for healthcare, it's for transportation, it's for energy, it's for everybody. Our job is to disrupt that playbook. We need to make this expensive for them to do this kind of attack. And we're not going to stop them from conducting the attacks. There's always going to be crime. There's always going to be people who want to do this kind of stuff. But we need to make it so that they can't, I mean, they automate. They've got business models themselves. They've got their own efficiency, targets that they're trying to hit and things like that. So the more that we make it difficult and put friction in place for those attacks to work, the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, it's very interesting. We're almost out of time, but the final thought I was having is, why? So why are we doing this? Well, there's been reports that come out, articles that talk about the, obvious and direct link between a cyber incident and patient safety. I mean, we just to argue that these electronic systems make healthcare better, which they almost certainly do, and then to say in the same sentence that the loss of them has no impact on patient care, that makes no sense, right? That logically doesn't work. So we know that cyber incidents can and often do impact patient care. We don't want to have them, right? That's why we're trying to prevent them. Right. The government is trying to put in minimum standards, just like seatbelts, because we see people are going to be hurt if this doesn't happen. As you said, most of anyone involved in cyber of any size organization wants these things and would almost look at this as, thank you for coming to help us. I don't have the resources, and sometimes there's no will. But when you mandate it, I don't need to have the will. I can tell them this has to be done now. And oh, by the way, we have money to do it. So that's all good. That all makes sense. The one sentiment, and we may have touched on this a little bit before, but the one concern was sort of don't make it too hard and don't punish the victim, right? We never, because that's a real interesting thing. And sometimes I think that's even overdone to where we're so afraid of having any kind of penalties. Let's say someone continually clicks on phishing emails. Well, most CISOs, the last thing they want to do is go down the punishment route. I get that. You're a victim. You were taken advantage of. It's healthcare. We all love each other. So, but that's the one concern on this that we hear. Don't punish the victim. Don't punish the victim. So I'm just going to leave you, that's sort of the final question is, how do you balance all these things? We don't want to punish the victim, but at some point you have to have accountability.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's already a little bit of a line that's been drawn in the sand. HHS won't say this. I kind of informally say it, or I guess I'm formally say it on an interview. Public Law 116.321 has already stated that if you have implemented NIST practices or efforts under 405D, promulgated under 405D, you are doing what is considered a recognized cybersecurity practice, and you will be incentivized. You will be given consideration in a victim kind of situation. There's a little bit of a line that's already been kind of drawn, with that. So what does that mean if you haven't done them? I mean, now, again, this is where HHS will not say, well, then you're going to immediately get penalized. They're not saying that. But you're on an upward slope that you have to start arguing. CPGs are adding more clarity to this, and it's the essentials are essentials. And frankly, if you want cyber insurance now, there are, depending on who you're using, there are 5 controls that you absolutely have to have, or you're not even going to get insured. And that's not the federal government. That's the industry applying that pressure. And so, like, it's kind of, it's a losing argument anymore to say that any attack against you is you are not responsible for it. If you're doing everything that you're supposed to be doing, you're absolutely right that you are a victim in this case then, and you should not penalize the victim. I completely agree with that statement. If you've ignored it and you've grossly ignored it, I don't know. I mean, in this day and age, that'd be like walking outside in -5-degree weather in shorts and t-shirt and getting upset that you got hypothermia,
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Makes perfect sense. And I think you're doing great work, and you're spending a lot of your time on this. So I guess I can thank you, and on the behalf
Thanks.
of the industry, thank you for all the work you're putting in. And I'm
Appreciate that.
sure you're doing your best to shepherd all these competing sort of voices along and get to a happy place, because the best thing about you doing it is you sit in the seat.
Yeah.
Now, with meaningful use, not to open up a whole can of worms, just make a point and then we'll go. With meaningful use, with those committees they put together, there were a lot of people that didn't sit in the seat that
Mm-hmm.
had to deal with that stuff. One of them who did and was a voice of reason a lot was Mark Probst from
Yep.
your organization. I used to
Yep.
listen to all these meetings, and sometimes Mark would be
Yep.
like, "Hey, hold on," because he's sitting there going, "I got to do this stuff, and this doesn't make any sense." God
Yep.
bless Mark. I hope he's doing
Yep.
well.
Yep.
Um,
Agreed.
all right, Eric. Well, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Anthony.